I want to get right into our message this morning. This is the last of a series, Out of the Darkness. We like our memorials, don't we? Our monuments, our memorials, the things in our life that we go to. I mean, how many of you have taken vacations and part of that vacation was to go see some kind of monument? Yeah, like South Dakota, you go where to see the... What? I can't hear you. Oh, Mount Rushmore, yeah. Been there, went once, and then we just drove by it and went the second time. Yeah, we like our monuments, right? It was the year 1991. I was a freshman in Olivet Nazarene University, and I was on the varsity basketball team. Actually, I wasn't on the varsity basketball. I was on the basketball team. But that year, I wanted to be on the varsity basketball team so bad. I worked so hard to be in that team because that year, Olivet Nazarene University's varsity basketball team at Christmas break was taking a trip to Hawaii to play in a tournament there in Honolulu, Hawaii, on that island there. And I worked really hard, and I made it. I got to go. So in 1991, over Christmas break, I got to go to Hawaii and play basketball. Really hard to do. You know, that's just grunge that out. You know, so while we were there, you have to imagine in Honolulu and Hawaii, what's one thing you're going to do when you go there? Surfing. That is one thing you're going to do there. That's the number one thing you're going to do there, right? What's the number two thing you're going to... No, you're going to go see Pearl Harbor, right? I mean, you grow up your whole life hearing about Pearl Harbor, and to be that far out into the Pacific Ocean and to be on the island, I mean, yeah, you might as well go see it, right? Well, I remember going out there, and there at Pearl Harbor, they have what is called the USS Arizona Memorial. It is truly an amazing thing. It's a somber place. I mean, here's these young basketball guys, you know, and we're just young and stupid. And we go out there and they put us on this boat and they ferry us out there. But when you step onto that memorial, knowing the history, and you begin to read all the names on the wall, it's an amazing place. You can sit there and look over the side and see, as you can see in the picture, the outline of the USS Arizona. It's sombering because knowing when they tell you this, below you are 1,102 sailors and Marines who will forever be entombed in that ship. They think they know that when the torpedo hit the ship, it blew such a way that all of the deck levels just flattened. And so they left out of 1,177 sailors, 1,102 died. So when you go on there and you read all those names on the wall and you are there, it's just a somber place to be. We like our memorials because they remind us of people who have done incredible things, people who have sacrificed, people who have gone above and beyond and done the extraordinary in life, right? And so we build memorials. One of those is the Lincoln Memorial. How many of you been to the Lincoln Memorial? Yeah. It's really a neat place. But when you go in, it says, in this temple, I thought, oh wow, I'm at church. As in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. And they have this huge memorial, and 8 million people a year go to see this. And then there's Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. There in that place where he gave his speech, I Have a Dream, that many believe changed the course of the African Americans in our country and changed the course of our country forever. But there, when you go there, there's now a memorial, a monument that has been turned into a memorial for him. Did you know we have our own monument? Angola? Yeah, and everything, and there's things down there called Monument Pizza, right? And monument this and monument that. We have a memorial down here, a monument that's been memorialized. In 1917, it cost $17,000 to build. Last year, that would have been $1 million in our day last year. Today, it's 2. No, inflation's not that bad. 1970, 17,000, 1,278 names of men who fought in the Civil War are etched on that memorial. Pretty neat, huh? And you see people, when you live here, you just kind of get used to it. It's something you got to drive around. But when people come to Angola, once in a while, we'll see them out there. We love our memorials. Have you ever thought about how a memorial comes into existence? I think it begins with a person, a man, a woman, or a group of people, and they do something extraordinary. They do something out of the ordinary. They do something that changes the course of history or changes your life, right? Or someone else's life. And when the person does something big enough, it creates a movement. And so there's this natural flow from the person that becomes a movement. And the movement is when people join their vision. They join their mission. They go out and they fight for this person and fight what they believe in and fight for what they're doing. So it goes from a person to a movement. And then once the movement has gained ground and done great things, I guess, then they make monuments for those things, those people, or those movements. And the monuments, out of the movement comes these monuments. Monuments become places where we go to remember what they've done, to remember how it's changed me. I'm always impressed at the Vietnam Memorial when I see someone who was in Vietnam standing there with their hand on the wall. You know they're touching a name. That is where places where we go. It's a monument that's been built so that people can go and memorialize. So there's this natural flow. A person or a group or somebody does something extraordinary. A movement happens. Then they build a monument to them, and then we go as in memorial to those places. That's how it happens. There's a natural flow of this. But what about the church? What about Jesus? I fear that the Christian faith has been developed over the centuries the same way we build our monuments and our memorials to great people. Our churches have become monuments. This is a place that we have built so that we can go and remember and worship Jesus. We feel closer to the movement. We feel closer to the person when we're in church, when we're in the building, when we're together. We feel closer to Jesus when we go to our sacred places. And I get it. The natural development is there. It's something we do. All over the world, people build these, and this is how they come into monuments and memorials. But is this what Jesus really had in mind when Jesus dreamt up the church? Is this really what Jesus had in mind? That we would go and build sacred places where we could go and remember, where we could go and worship? Is this the idea church for Jesus? We live out there all week long, don't we? In our secular spaces. We're bombarded out there with the ungodly and all of the things that happen out there. We say out there what we want. We think what we want. We do what we want. We live without little thought of Jesus all week long until it's time to go to the monument. Why? Because there at the monument, we can memorialize Jesus and remember him, and we feel good about that, and it makes us feel closer to God. How does this happen? I had a friend who was remodeling a church. He told me a story of they were doing a complete remodel of the church, and there was things in there that were so old they had to be replaced. One of the things was the altars. They decided that the altars were broke down, they were marked up, they were old, they needed to be replaced. And so they took the altars out of the church and brought brand new altars in. The next Sunday, you would have thought that he started a hurricane, a tornado, World War III, you name it. There was a group of people in that church that rose up, angry and furious, threatening to leave the church. How could you do this? You took away our altars. And he's like, no, I didn't. They're right there. So he calls a meeting, sits down with the people, tries to understand, why are you so upset that we replaced the altars? And one by one, they would walk up to the altar and they'd say, Pastor, 40 years ago, I knelt down right there and gave my heart to Jesus. And you took that away. That's someone who has memorialized their faith. You say, well, what's wrong with that? Nothing. But really, you're ready to blow it all up because the one place that you knelt and gave your heart to Jesus, what's more important, that place or loving one another? You see what I mean? We give our faith these monuments and all of us have them. We all have places in our lives where we had these spiritual experiences and these spiritual highs, and they become sacred places to us, and I understand that. But is that really what Jesus has in mind for us? The problem with monuments, here's the problem. Monuments and memorials are stationary. They don't move. They don't live. They don't think. They don't do anything for the mission of God. They're just simply places that we go and memorialize and remember and feel close to. These are not places that can move. When our faith becomes tied to a place or a thing or an experience or a memory, we get stuck there. Jesus did not come and do what he did so that we would build monuments and memorials. Jesus doesn't call us to sit in our religious experiences and just absorb in these mountaintop experiences. Jesus calls us to something different. To places, listen, where monuments cannot go. Jesus is leading us to places that we cannot take our places at the altar with us. Luke chapter 9, verse 28, Jesus says, about 8 days, and Jesus says it, but about 8 days later, Jesus took Peter, John, and James up on a mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was transformed. And the clothes became blazing white. Suddenly, 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared. Can you imagine this? I can't imagine this, but it happened to Peter, James, and John. It appeared and began to talk with Jesus. They were glorious to see, and they were speaking about his exodus from the world, which was about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. Next verse. Peter and the others had fallen asleep. When they woke up, they saw Jesus' glory and the 2 men standing with him. And Moses and Elijah were starting to leave. As they were starting to leave, Peter, not even knowing what he was saying, blurted out, Master, it's wonderful for us to be here on the mountain, experiencing this glorious thing that's happening before our eyes. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. We'll stop there. Listen, a memorial might be okay for Moses and Elijah, but not Jesus. The first mistake in wanting to build a shelter or a memorial for the 3 men was that they were actually elevating Jesus to the stature of Moses and Elijah. These 2 men, as far as Jews were concerned, Listen, Moses and Elijah were it. They were some of the biggest characters and prophets in their history, in their religion, in their faith. They were considered the greatest prophets who played a role in the history of the Jews and will play a role later in the coming kingdom. But Jesus is not Elijah and Moses. Not even close. Jesus is greater. And when they wanted to build a shelter, they were wanting to build something for the Son of God who did not need that. He's not just a great prophet or a great person. Jesus is the Son of the living God. But in their defense, it was a pretty awesome thing, right? I mean, to be standing there and all of a sudden this is happening, and I kind of think when it says they fell asleep, I think they fainted. That's what I really think happened. Kind of like you did, Katie, last week in here. She's okay, by the way. All of you are wondering. We kept her home. But I think the experience they just fainted. So in their defense, it was a religious experience that you don't want to forget. What they wanted to do, though, was a normal thing for them. The Jews were known for building monuments, for building places, sacred places to remember things that had happened to them, that God had done for them. They create these sacred spaces where they can come back and worship and remember. But God had them there not so that they would build a monument. God had something else in mind. Look at verse 34. But even as he was saying this, a cloud overshadowed them, and terror gripped them as the cloud covered them. Then a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, my chosen one." Listen to him. Don't build a memorial. Don't build a shelter. Don't build a sacred place that you're going to come back to and remember and memorialize. No, I want you to listen to him because he is not Moses and Elijah, as important as they are. He is my son, and you need to follow him. You need to do what he says. You need to listen to him. Following and listening to a live person guide you around is very different than going to a monument and a memorial. One is safe. The other one's a little scary. One is comfortable. The other one is not so comfortable. One doesn't really require a big sacrifice, but the other one requires your life. These guys wanted to build this monument for him, and God speaks out of a cloud and says, "Look, he's my son. Do what he says. Obey him." God didn't want them to memorialize the moment. Instead, he wanted them to listen. The problem with creating these sacred places where we go back to remember, and that becomes our faith, is this, that where we go to do sacred things, it's that faith becomes more about where I've been instead of where I'm going. If they'd built that memorial, then that faith experience would have been so much more about what happened to them then in that moment than it would have been when Jesus speaks to them what was about to happen down the road. Memorials focus on what Jesus has done. Listening to Jesus is more about where are we going. The only testimony that some of us have is what God did for us 40 years ago. The only testimony that I have, the last time I can say I heard God speak to me was 20 years ago. When is the last time God spoke to you? When is the last time you were listening? When is the last time God did something great and amazing in your life other than just coming to a memorial? When is the last time you heard God call you to do something greater than just a Bible study or church service? You say, well, Pastor, don't rip on Bible studies. I'm not. But if that's all your faith is about, maybe you've memorialized your faith. Maybe you've turned it into a monument that you simply go and you do your religious duties and you remember and you worship and then you go home and that's all you hear. When was the last time that God called you to the uncomfortable, to the sacrificial, to the challenging moments in life? When has he asked you to move out from your well-planned and comfortable lives to do something unplanned and uncomfortable for the kingdom? We get comfortable in our monuments, but to follow Jesus is messy. Jesus doesn't want memorials. Jesus wants movements. He wants movements. Jesus didn't just create the church to be a place where people go. He created the church so that we might be a movement who goes out and does his will. Jesus leads us not just to the mountaintops, and they are expensive. They are important to us. But Jesus leads us off of our mountains, down into the valleys. Why? Because it's there we find the fringes of society. It's in the valley that we experience the hurting and the broken, the hungry and the poor and the addicted, the orphan and the widow. Jesus calls us out of our sacred places to leave them and calls us into the shattered lives of people. You say, well, I don't see any of that there, Pastor. Look at verse 37. The next day, after they had come down the mountain, a large crowd met Jesus. There you go. How easy it would have been to just stay up there in the presence of God and Elijah and Moses and just shine for the world to see. But instead, the next day, Jesus comes down the mountain and he goes back to where the people are. Why? Because in verse 38, a man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, my only son." Next verse, we're just going to finish up here. An evil spirit keeps seizing him, making him scream. It throws him into convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It batters him and hardly ever leaves him alone. I begged your disciples to cast out the spirit. Listen, but they could not do it. Here's Peter and James and John experiencing this incredible mountaintop experience. But it did nothing for them to help someone who really needed help. Next verse. Jesus said, "You faithless and corrupt people, how long must I be with you and put up with you?" Wow, that sounds kind of harsh, doesn't it? Then he said to the man, "Bring your son here." As the boy came forward, the demon knocked him around on the ground and threw him into a violent convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the evil spirit and healed the boy. And listen, and he gave him back to his father. Wow. To see someone who has been gripped by evil and sin and brokenness and evil spirits, delivered and freed, that's what Jesus wants you to do. I can't do that. Well, then go back up on the mountain, pray a little longer, and let's come back down the mountain. Let's leave our sacred spaces and let them be here as a tool for us to come and gather and worship and be together and enjoy. But let us not forget, Jesus doesn't call us here on Sunday mornings. He calls us out there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He calls us into the homes of our neighbors who are struggling and suffering, not to judge them, not to tell them how they should live their life, but simply to love them. Because in that love, the love of Jesus, there is power to change their life. And you begin to share with them the good news. Jesus loves you, and so do I. We're going to come and finish a song this morning. I know I kept you a little late, but I had some big stuff to tell you earlier. This whole series has been about out of the darkness. This idea that Jesus calls us out of these sacred spaces so that we might go and do what he has done to bring light to the world. That's what he calls us to do. He sends us. Father, I pray this morning for this moment. I know you're working in our hearts and in our minds. It spoke to me, Father. I love my church. I love coming to church. I love getting in here on Sunday mornings and being with people, worshiping, singing, getting to preach. I love these times, Lord. But I'm reminded of the Mount of Transfiguration, that you didn't stay up there. You went back down into the valley where people needed you. And you called your disciples to do the same. May we leave this space today refreshed and renewed and amazed at who you are. But may we not forget that you're calling us, you're sending us out there.